I had been kind of following it. You know, it was this vague thing, something happening overseas.
I mean, I remember hearing about it in the news, whatever, in December 2019. You know, it's happening in China. Oh, well, you know, it's like, that's happening out there. I mean, diseases are happening all over the world.
In February of 2020, there was things on the news, but it seemed like it was a very far away thing, not something that was really a Vermont thing.
You know, we began hearing things, then, you know, it seemed to be in China, but then out in Washington State, you know, a little bit in Europe and building up. And, you know, there was obviously, you know, not sure what to do about this this new thing. Yeah, weird name, COVID.
We heard on the radio and the news what was happening over in China and this flu and how contagious it was. And I'm the type of person that when I start hearing or seeing something like that, I'm like, we're going to have a pandemic. So, you know, whether it's the avian flu or regular flu, I'm just that type of person that's like, all right, we should probably start thinking about safety measures for the residents in case something like this comes out.
With COVID, there was a lot that was unknown. And our EPI team started sort of tracking alerts and information coming out from the CDC as early as December. And then it started to really ramp up early January, mid-January, and then really fully ramp up into February. They were asking us questions like, you know, are you prepared with your surge plan for the laboratory? Do you have your continuity of operations plan ready?
I remember a moment when it felt more real was, it was in February, and the governor invited Dr. Levine to participate in a cabinet meeting. He was on the phone, but he was describing to us, you know, one early Tuesday morning about the virus, about how it was impacting parts of the country, you know, what its sort of properties were at that time, what we knew about it, what we didn't know about it. And that was certainly a moment I remember, both because I remember Dr. Levine, the first time I really knew who he was or heard of him, and seemed very sharp and competent and, you know, trustworthy. But also first time I'd heard someone talk in great detail about the coronavirus and what it, you know, what its impact could be on Vermont.
Welcome to Life Became Very Blurry, a podcast from the Vermont Historical Society, sharing the experiences of Vermonters during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Amanda Gustin, Director of Collections and Access at the Vermont Historical Society. Over the last 3 years, I've led a team to collect the history of COVID-19 through oral histories, archival material, objects, and more. We know that we're just getting started, but for the 5-year anniversary of the start of lockdowns, we've put together excerpts from oral histories that offer a look back.
As February turned into March, we started having conversations here about how we would deal with it. And I remember saying something like, you know, we'll probably all have to wear masks. And I think that had already been talked about, so I wasn't like, you know, ahead of the curve too much. And I remember Jason sort of laughing at that, like, you know, he didn't really think that we would get to that point, but, you know, we did pretty quickly.
So weeks before it felt like people had really caught on, I'll never forget leaving a 24-hour call shift, exhausted, and going to Target and going to get cleaning supplies and looking at Clorox wipes. Everything was just stocked like normal because no one was hoarding anything yet. No one had really, I felt like, arrived at this awareness that something big was about to happen. And I thought, oh, you know, 2 containers of Clorox wipes, that should do it. That's all I would need. But I definitely felt very tuned in weeks before other folks and had some feedback like, you're really paranoid, this won't be so bad.
So I had gone to a big conference on co-teaching. and I think it was like March 2nd to the 4th or something. It was in Boston, a big conference center. And then my daughter, who is a school psychologist, called me or texted me on Thursday and said, "Mom, are you aware that there's this new virus? It's not just a regular virus, but you should be sure you're not sitting at a table with somebody who's coughing or seems sick." And then she said, "Are you aware of anybody at your table who's coughing?" And I remember I emailed or texted back. I said, "Well, there's one woman across from me who's been coughing all day yesterday." And she said, "You need to get up and move now." She said, "I don't care what's happening. Just pick up your stuff, pretend you're leaving, go over, stand in the corner and find a new spot. But you can't sit there." So I thought,
Well, good morning, everyone. As the global outbreak of coronavirus, or COVID-19, continues to develop, and federal guidance is shifting from containment to mitigation, we know Vermonters have growing concerns about what this means to them and have many questions. So we thought it was important to update you on the current status here in Vermont, our ongoing current circumstances, as well as ensuring we're prepared if larger or longer-term measures become necessary. I want to thank Vermonters for their understanding and attention to this issue and their cooperation in following CDC and Vermont Health Department guidance to ensure we do all we can to avoid as much spread as possible here in Vermont. Please know we are ready to respond if it does spread. I'll now turn this over to Dr. Levine, Commissioner of the Department of Health.
Thank you, Governor Scott. As I'm sure you're all aware, this is an evolving national and local situation. In the past 48 hours, the number of U.S. cases that have been reported has escalated to the number 159, and the number of deaths has increased to 11. And as you know, though we have no laboratory-confirmed cases in Vermont, we are surrounded by states, as well as the province of Quebec, that have all reported cases.
Well, at the very beginning, it was really scary. I mean, nobody knew what was happening. And my husband and I were both, he's 80, I'm 79, so we were really scared.
And it was almost like waiting for a tidal wave to come. We knew what was happening in China and other countries, and we could kind of see it coming. We had the first cases out west, and then it was, creeping towards Vermont.
Pretty much no one alive today has experienced anything as far-reaching or as completely overwhelming as the COVID-19 pandemic. It felt like the whole world had turned inside out in a matter of weeks, days, or even hours. Vermont has always been a very small place, and sometimes has found itself outside of the mainstream of history, but not this time. Vermonters experienced the pandemic alongside people around the world. It was a collective experience, but it was also a unique one. Every single person had their own individual pandemic.
In the beginning of March, I remember that the first COVID case in Vermont was around March. I think it was like March 7th or so. And that was a Saturday, I remember. After that, I think things started to change. Before that, we were all having events as normal. We have a winter carnival at Middlebury, which is usually the last week of February, and that took place as normal. It was really the beginning of March where I saw sort of things were changing.
I didn't really think about it till really mid-March. We had a big party for one of my sisters, March 7th, and another sister said, "I'm not going. I heard about this flu-like disease, COVID. I'm not going." And we're like, I was like, "What are you talking about?"
I
think it was Friday, the 9th of March, that the stock market started to respond to the pandemic. And the web metrics at the company that I own and operate an e-commerce business. And we sell sap evaporators for hobby maple syrup makers. And so March is like go time for us. And we noticed on that Friday, I believe it's Friday the 9th of March, that our web metrics cut in half. So our web traffic was cut in half.
So here at school, the dominoes fell pretty quickly. We knew Wednesday was the day. Wednesday was it March 11th that like Tom Hanks came down with COVID in Australia. The NBA was going to cancel its season, and Donald Trump's, stopped travel from Europe. And so for some reason that, like, for me, and I think a lot of people, it cued in that something big was happening.
It was kind of in the background, and I really wasn't aware until March. I think it was early March. My husband's birthday is the 12th of March. So we had some plans. And of course, that was right before everything shut down. So I think it feels selfish to say this, but like, I was thinking, is this going to affect our plans? And I'm sure, so many people had those feelings, but I think it was March, because that's when you were starting to hear about it's getting closer to home.
They were tracking the data, they were tracking cases, and I believe it was in early March was when we had, I think it was March 5th, 6th or so, is when we had the first presumptive positive case. That was that news really rippled throughout the state. It was one of those "where were you" moments when we had our first case, and so from there, the Scott administration started holding these almost daily press briefings, talking about what's the latest, how many cases do we have, how much PPE do we have, how do we test for this, how do we know how to track it.
Thank you all for being here for our latest update on COVID-19, commonly known as coronavirus. While Vermont only has 2 known cases at this time, we know it's just a matter of time before there are many more. Every single one of us has an incredibly important role to play in this. We're all in this together. We're going to act together, and we're going to get through this together. That's why today I declared a state of emergency. And through these emergency powers, I'm implementing several additional mitigation strategies, which will be in effect until April 15th. Though that could be shortened or extended based on what we experience on the ground. Additional steps and details are outlined in the executive order. And while I know many are concerned about our pre-K through 12 schools, in close consultation with our team, especially our healthcare team, we have determined that closing schools at this point is not seen as effective, at least not yet.
I also remember, there was quite a bit of us that would attend these press conferences, and we're standing next to each other. Particularly the day that the governor declared the state of emergency on March 13th. There were probably 25 of us huddled together at the front of the room, and probably 20 or 25 people from the media that were in the audience, and no masks, no social distancing. It was just so early in that we knew so little about the virus, and what, we didn't realize how vulnerable we were to it yet. And then after the press conference, remember us all gathering back up in the governor's cabinet room, and we started getting calls that, Killington was closing. I think it was Jay Peak was the first one. Jay Peak was closing for the season early, and then Sugarbush. And then we started to think about all of the large group gatherings, small group gatherings, things that were imminently happening that we were going to have to try to start to pull the plug on or see what the organizers were going to do with it.
Before everything really started shutting down, it was this sort of whisper campaign about, geez, oh boy, better not get sick. And then getting back and getting these directives from the state of Vermont with regard to having to cancel games, at tournaments that were going on for recreational activities that had to be canceled and canceled.
I was thinking, well, this is something that's going to happen for a couple of weeks and we'll be through this.
I'd say I went from, like whispers about COVID to, a full shutdown within like 10 days, is my recollection.
I just can remember canceling one music gig after another, like just, I have a very visual memory of like looking at my calendar, delete, as all that spring work got canceled. So yeah, again, getting real fast.
People weren't expecting, kind of the tidal wave that happened. I think a lot of people remember when that day when it was announced that COVID was here, right? We immediately knew that there was going to be a food emergency that was going to be like a mass feeding event. And we also knew at the Vermont Food Bank that we were not ready for this.
There was mounting anxiety that still was rippling through the state. As you remember, many Vermonters made a run on toilet paper, on chicken, on pasta. I remember walking through 3 different grocery stores. I'd worked several days in a row. I didn't have any food at the house. And I remember walking through at least 3 different grocery stores in South Burlington, and all of the shelves were empty. There was no protein, there was no pasta, just sauces and, maybe some sweets, but really not a lot on the shelves. And it was almost apocalyptic to really see that.
So in the spring of 2020, I was in my 10th year teaching health education to grades pre-K through 8 at the St. Johnsbury School District. And that March, when they said they were going to close the schools down for, 3 weeks, I just could not believe it. The governor had assured us the Friday before that he was not going to shut down the schools. It would be the worst thing we could ever do, and I agreed. But that Monday we came back and we had 3 days, 2.5 days with the kids to prepare them to go home for what we thought was going to be 3 weeks.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here for our latest update on COVID-19. As I've said before, we're learning more about this new virus every single day, and our top priority continues to be protecting our people. As you know, I declared a state of emergency, and we've implemented a range of mitigation steps to slow the spread of the virus, from limiting public gatherings and restricting visitors at long-term care facilities and hospitals, to banning state employee work travel, and extending unemployment benefits to those who have to self-isolate, and so much more. It's important for Vermonters to know that additional measures are inevitable, but every action we've taken thus far has been based on science, data, and the guidance of experts. That's why yesterday I ordered the dismissal of all pre-K through 12 schools by the end of the day Tuesday, March 17th. So effective March 18th, all schools should be closed. This decision was made in close consultation with the Department of Health and the Agency of Education. We felt this was necessary in order to keep...
I really think nobody believed that we'd be gone for more than a couple of days. Students left, and teachers were advised that we would have Thursday and Friday. That was a Wednesday afternoon. We would have Thursday and Friday to come in and out of the building and get whatever we needed for the, who knows how long, for the foreseeable future. So we were all scrambling around our rooms the next day, gathering things and trying to figure out how to teach remotely.
Really thought we were going to go back after 2 weeks. So I also decided, I'll use this as like a vacation, a break, and then kind of didn't do schoolwork for 2 weeks, which was not a very good idea.
And I was down looking. I still have some of those signs where I had to tell people that they couldn't be on playground equipment. And again, I'm just starting to talk about like not processing it, but like it just brings back these feelings, these emotions where like I realize like that trauma is sort of put into a box and put away, because like I start getting a little emotional thinking about shutting down playgrounds and having to like tape up basketball hoops to keep people from playing outside and walking, again, like that was wild for a pivot for us, for a recreation department. That was when it became really real for us.
Our ICU had 7 beds, and we turned them all into what we call negative pressure rooms. So whenever a door was opened, it would suck in large amounts of air. Nothing would leave the room, was the idea. Later on in the pandemic, we learned that this was a bit of overkill, that the disease couldn't be transmitted on surfaces as readily as when it started. We didn't really know a lot about it. So you would, get there in the morning, depending on how sick your patient was, you would spend either majority of the morning in the room. If they were on a ventilator, you would spend most of the day in there. And you would write notes, stick them on the glass for your coworkers to bring you something. During that time, you weren't eating or drinking or going to the bathroom. You were just kind of focused on the patient. We did end up having the first death in Vermont occurred in our ICU from COVID. But it was a gentleman who was in his late 90s and, was in fragile health otherwise.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for tuning in. We're going to start this afternoon's briefing with some words from Dr. Levine. Dr. Levine.
Thank you, Governor. I'd like to give you a little bit of an update on where we are in Vermont. Over the weekend, the numbers did have a spike upwards, and now we've gone from 52 to 75 positive tests in the state. Unfortunately, and we send our condolences to all of the families involved, our deaths are now 5 in Vermont. There were 3 additional deaths over the weekend, all relating to the outbreak at Burlington Health and Rehab.
On behalf of all Vermonters, I give my deepest sympathies to those who lost loved ones due to this pandemic. That's why our mission has been to do all we can to slow the spread of the coronavirus. The precautions we're taking are to protect our loved ones and neighbors who face greater risks. And to win this battle, we have to do our part, all of us. It's literally in our hands. At the state level, we've done a lot to make sure people are social distancing, including limiting the size of social gatherings to 10, dismissing schools, closing daycares, restaurants, bars, gyms, hair salons, and much, much more, as well as other efforts to slow the spread. We're now entering a new phase as we try to flatten this curve. Today, I signed an order to require businesses and not-for-profits to implement every work-from-home procedure they possibly can so their employees can stay home safe. Vermonters should also expect additional steps very, very soon that will further reduce contact and direct more to stay at home in order to slow the spread. It's not a question anymore of if, it's a question of when.
I can't remember. I think I feel like it was either Friday or over the weekend that Scott made his announcement.
Well, it was a Friday.
And we were just like, oh my God, how are we going to get this paper out? What's going to happen? And sure enough, people started pulling their ads, and we got the paper out on Wednesday, and then we lost, 50% of our advertising. Like basically our revenue was gone overnight, practically. We just, our business has completely changed overnight. We had 7 nights was at the printer, which was our annual dining guide. And that's like a $40,000 print job. So I canceled that right away because all those restaurants, it was going to be obsolete. It was already obsolete, and we're about to print it. So I'm trying to remember. It was just a mad scramble.
Nobody knew what was going on. We didn't know how, we were masking. People would leave the office. We would wipe everything down thoroughly for the next person to come in.
In this particular response, I think the thing that we really struggled with most was our supply chain struggles. We have incredibly skilled lab scientists here some of whom have been here for 30 years, 40 years. They know their methods, they know their competencies, they know how to respond in an emergency. But if you don't give them the tools, or the tools are not available to do their job, it's incredibly frustrating, and not demoralizing, but it brings morale down because they feel like they just can't they see the problem, they know how to fix it, but they just can't do it because they don't have the tool. So we ended up having to pivot a lot when we hit supply chain issues and getting really creative about how to solve those problems.
Good morning, everyone. We'll begin today with an update from Dr. Levine.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like you to refer to my little placard here, just to give you the beginning of the update. Each bar represents the cumulative number of cases on a given day during this past month. The blue portion of the bar represents the newest cases. Just eyeballing this, everyone can see that this does not represent linear growth. This is termed exponential growth. And we don't yet know what the days to come hold, but we can anticipate that everything will get higher. I want to remind you that it was only 2 weeks ago we had 1 case in Vermont. We have in excess of 100 now, 123 to be exact.
I know these are not easy times. There's a lot of economic uncertainty and much concern about the health of Vermonters due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I share the concern in both of these areas, but as we look at the challenges ahead, public safety must come first, which is why yesterday I issued the stay at home, stay safe order. Around the country and here in Vermont, we've seen an increasing number of cases which continues to grow. This is not unexpected. And while each and every step we've taken is needed, they have been difficult decisions to make, and this is a responsibility I do not take lightly. But here's what I need Vermonters to know, and this is what I need from them. I need you to stay home. Doing so will save lives. It's just that simple. We understand their basic needs, so you can leave for essential things like going to the grocery store or the pharmacy, or to seek medical care, or as I said earlier, just to get out and get some fresh air or some exercise. But when doing so, it's important to keep about 6 feet from others. Wash your hands a lot, and cough or sneeze into your elbow. And if you're unsure about something, whether you should be doing it or not, err on the side of public health and stay home. This order also directs businesses and nonprofits to suspend all in-person business operations. To be clear, this is on top of the closures I've already directed. and a requirement that anyone who can work from home should do so.
And I was working at the University of Vermont at the time, and I remember things very slowly shutting down and moving office equipment to my house and having to work with no instruction, no structure. Nobody knew what was going on. So from March 2020 until probably the end of the year, it was just very loosey-goosey, just trying to work. I was not involved in anything in the community. It was more just focusing on, if I need to go outside, how far do I need to walk across the street to get away from the person who's coming towards me? That was my life.
We started delivering the paper, like driving the paper around neighborhoods and asking people to put racks in their houses or out in front of their houses. I don't know if you remember, but people were afraid that it was on the paper for a couple weeks. So we were buying hand sanitizer and handing out gloves to our circulation people, hoping that they wouldn't freak out and decide they don't want to work. We did get declared essential. I mean, that the governor made it clear that we were allowed to continue to do business.
I remember hearing the governor saying that he was going to shut the border down on the radio while we were on our way to Canada. And so I called my boss and I said, well, what are we going to do? And he replied, that doesn't apply to us. We were exempt because we were considered critical, essential workers. And it wasn't just an idea. We actually were essential.
I have to say, when we were all shut down and there wasn't any traffic going through town and everything was quiet, personally, I loved it. I wished that was the way we lived all the time. I remember walking the dog down Route 7. There wasn't a car or a truck in sight. And clearly I'm a recluse because I thought it was fantastic. And interestingly, everybody in town was walking. There were people that I've never seen walking that were out walking up and down Route 7. I mean, we were just everywhere. So it was shocking and scary, but at the same time, I really embraced the quiet.
You know, everyone was suddenly at home. Everyone's on Zoom calls all day. Everyone's feeling this tremendous pressure of the break of their associational aspects of work because they're not seeing their compatriots day to day in person. They're isolated at home. They're also working with tremendous urgency, as someone described it, tremendous urgency in a circumstance of utter anxiety and planning with great diligence for a future they had no idea of, because no one knew how great the ramifications of this were. You know, people were dying in Vermont, but no one knew the next turn of the screw. Like, will this turn into a pandemic where, you know, thousands and thousands of people in Vermont die, that it will start to affect people of all ages? And so there's a great deal of concern. And then the fact that most businesses were closed, that many nonprofits were closed for a while, that restaurants were closed. You know, your whole lifestyle changed very dramatically in that period. You know, you'd walk downtown and you'd see absolutely no one on the street in Montpelier, no one driving. It was a little bit of a ghost town here. So we and meanwhile, everyone's working really hard, long hours alone.
I was really scared. I suddenly couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I lost almost 10 pounds. I wasn't sleeping. I was thinking about work constantly. So suddenly we brought work home with us. And so it was never ending, there was no distinction between home and work. And my husband is a pharmacist at UVM Medical Center. So he was going to work every day on empty highways, and working on the COVID floor. And so he would have to come home and he would have to take off all his stuff in the mudroom and leave it in a bin and change so he wasn't contaminating us. So he had a lot of work stress. They built the field hospital up at UVM. He was assigned to that spot. It was just at the time very uncertain about what was going to happen.
Governor Scott announced his Stay Home, Stay Safe order on March 24th, 2020. In this first episode, we've gathered stories of those incredible early days when the world was changing so quickly. In the next 6 episodes, you'll hear more about the weeks and the months that came afterwards, and how they changed almost everything about life in Vermont. We'll end the series with the story of how we put together this project and where we think history will go from here. You may hear things that sound familiar and recognizable, and you may hear experiences that are nothing like you imagined. This is the value of oral history. It brings together a huge variety of perspectives. We're so grateful to our field interviewers and the more than 110 people who were willing to sit down and contribute to this historic record.
So thank you very much for participating in today's COVID Oral History Project. If you would first start by stating and spelling your name.
Oh, okay. My name is Tori Lee Fisher Sass.
John Sales, John.
Meg Allison, MEG.
If you could introduce yourself.
My name is Nicole Patterson. I go by Nikki.
And can you describe your reason for participating in today's COVID Oral History Project?
Interesting. I received an email a few weeks ago saying that the Vermont Historical Society was seeking stories of educators who taught.
Sure. I saw an advertisement on our local listserv for it.
I'm very interested. I'm always interested in history and sort of how we tell the stories. I'm an author.
Let's go back to March 2020 when really all of our worlds changed. When did you first know that?
So, John, what was the experience of COVID in Vermont like for you?
Wow, that's a big question.
You've been listening to John Sales, Forrest Holtzapfel, Nikki Patterson, Earl Coopercamp, Kelly DeSico, Helen Reed, Mike Pichek, Tom McMurdo, Whitney Smith, Toralee Fisher Sass, Jeannie Lindheim, Monica Raymond, Benji Renton, Carolyn Ritter, Kate Wally McCabe, Meg Allison, Sally Blanchard O'Brien, Calvin Cutler, Bill Moore, Greg Stefanski, Jennifer Myhawk, Joy Warland, Amy Hornblass, Nina Neptune, Nathan Howell, Paula Routley, Susan Gage, Wei Wei Wong, Eric Rossier, and Paul Costello. We thank them all for being part of this program. You've also heard archival recordings of Governor Phil Scott and Secretary Mark Levine as part of their regular press briefings provided to us courtesy of Orca Media. The Life Became Very Blurry podcast is produced by me, Amanda Gustin, of the Vermont Historical Society, and Mary Wesley, Andy Kolovos, and Will Hamilton of Vermont Folklife. Oliver Purdue mixed this episode. Our theme music is the track Never Mind the Forecast from Burlington-based artist Expected Guest. Find more from Expected Guest on bandcamp.com. The interviews we heard in this program were created as part of the Vermont Historical Society's Collecting COVID-19, a Vermont Story, oral history project, and were conducted by me, Marcia Bozek, Mark Johnson, and Amber Wingerson. We had additional project support by Teresa Green and Tessa Brimblecombe. Funding for this work was provided by a grant from IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services. To access the full text and audio of these oral history recordings, and to learn more about how the Vermont Historical Society has collected the history of COVID-19, please visit www.vermonthistory.org.